I now call to order the Planning Commission meeting of April 22nd, 2020. Will everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Commissioner Biagini, will you please read the statement of values?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
As we gather, we humbly seek blessings upon this meeting. May we act with strength, courage, and will to perform our obligations and duties to our people with justice to all. Let us seek wisdom so that we may act in the best interest of our people, our neighbors, and our country. All this we ask so we may serve our community with fairness and respect, putting their needs before all.
Thank you, Commissioner Biagini. Elizabeth, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Kelly?
Here.
Commissioner Casey?
Present.
Commissioner Jane?
Here.
Commissioner Salem?
Here.
Chair Becker?
Here.
Commissioner Biagini?
Here.
Commissioner Cherukuru?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. All right, to our viewers and public, tonight's meeting is conducted in a unique way to curb the spread of our coronavirus pandemic. We are taking many precautions to help with the safety and well-being of our residents, staff, and other commissioners during this shelter-in-place. This meeting is being conducted by Zoom with all the commissioners participating from their homes, including myself, staff, and the staff is from City Hall. So bear with us for any delays or even technical issues during the duration of our meeting. And I ask everyone to give at least maybe a 5-second delay if we're trying to wait for somebody to answer. Okay, so we will now be moving on to Declaration of Commission Procedures, which there will be none tonight because there are no public hearing items and we will not be voting on anything. So we're going to just dive right into public presentations. Elizabeth, are there any members of the public that would like to briefly address the commission on any item not on the agenda tonight?
No, there are not, Chair Becker.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. All right, so we're going to dive into our study session tonight, and our study session is on the updated proposed changes to the city's transportation analysis methodology from level of service to vehicle miles traveled. And once staff is done with the presentation, I'm going to ask our commissioners to, once you line up and I give you a chance to speak, you're going to ask 3 questions in this round, and then after that, you will ask questions further. And we will now start with the staff's presentation.
Thank you, Chair Becker. This is Rena Brio, Planning Manager. I just kind of wanted to tee this up for you very briefly. So tonight we have a study session for the Planning Commission. And this is really to get input from the Planning Commission, as we've been coming to you a few times, actually once previously, and we're going to have to bring forward for the City Council to adopt a change to really the transportation analysis methodology from level of service to vehicle miles traveled to align with the state requirements. And so I wanted to first just really acknowledge the hard work of Public Works staff to bring this forward for you. There is a member of our team who had intended to be here today. His name is Mike Liu. He's the Assistant Director of Public Works. He had a situation that he had to deal with, very important to his family, so he is not able to join us. And we do have, who is our main presenter, Karen Mack, who is a transportation consultant and has been working really closely with city staff to bring this forward to you. So for tonight's study session, really the purpose of the study session is to get the commission more comfortable with the details of the proposed transportation analysis methodology change, to get feedback, recognizing that we are about a month away from bringing forward something for the actual consideration of the Planning Commission to recommend to the City Council that change. So the Planning Commission is in a body of recommending or even adopting CEQA determinations, and this is really about CEQA and changing thresholds in the California Environmental Quality Act from using level of service to vehicle miles traveled. So this can be a multifaceted conversation, but I just want you to understand the context for why we're bringing this forward. And with that, I'm going to transfer this over to Karen Mack.
Thank you. Good evening, Planning Commissioners, Commissioner Chair. I come before you again, and in the first study session, I also was a co-presenter of the city's staff's progress on VMT adoption. So today, after briefly reviewing the first study session, we'll present information about implementing VMT, including the VMT methodology, the staff's evaluation of key policy considerations, technical tools used to study VMT, project examples of VMT in Santa Clara, schedule for adoption, and finally, we will conclude with Q&A and next steps. There were two study sessions that were held. November 5th, the City Council had a study session, and in the December 11th, the Planning Commission had this study session. And at the December 11th study session, our presentation focused on how implementing VMT will align with the city's general plan goals and the Climate Action Plan. We also discussed the July 1st, 2020 deadline for implementation and how level of service can no longer be used to measure transportation environmental impacts. We also discussed why the state's recommending using VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, to measure transportation environmental impacts, because it reduces GHG emissions and driving alone by encouraging denser mixed-use development proximate to transit. Lastly, we discussed how LOS can still be evaluated, what other cities are doing, and VTA's supporting role in transitioning to VMT and our schedule for implementation. There were a number of comments and desires and concerns expressed in the first round of study sessions. We have considered the feedback we received in developing the recommendations proposed for the draft policy and still encourage more feedback as we craft the policy. So, both the Planning Commission and the Council expressed a variety of concerns. Amongst them, if you'll recall, is the concern that the traffic is regional, that there needed to be a comprehensive countywide plan, that big data could be important in measuring VMT, a question about travel demand models and how they work, what is the methodology, how important LOS, level of service, is. There was overall support for the transition to VMT. There was concern with existing availability of transit. There was desire to improve our transportation demand management programs. There was support for alternative forms of transportation like bike and scooter share. And finally, there was a desire for Vision Zero in Santa Clara. To help California jurisdictions with the transition to VMT, the state's Office of Planning and Research published the Technical Advisory on Evaluating Transportation Impacts in CEQA. Staff has used this document as guidance in evaluating how to implement VMT in the city of Santa Clara. This document provides guidance and recommendations. However, it also acknowledges that the state is providing advice and recommendations, and agencies may use it as at their own discretion to implement their own VMT policies. City staff has been evaluating the key policy considerations and how this will influence development in Santa Clara. The state guidelines allow California cities to set their own policy requirements, provided that the adopted policy promotes reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, development of multimodal transportation networks, and a diversity of land uses. The transition from level of service to VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is a change to the way the city evaluates transportation environmental impacts to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. The CEQA process requires cities to set baselines, thresholds to measure transportation impacts, as well as other CEQA subject areas like air quality, noise, geology, etc., for development projects as well as transportation projects. In addition to setting baselines and thresholds, the state guidelines also recommend that certain projects be exempt from VMT analysis or presumed to have a less than significant transportation impact, simply because these types of project inherently reduce VMT. Lastly, intersection operations and traffic flow continue to be important to residents, employees, and visitors in Santa Clara. Therefore, evaluating how LOLOS can continue to be used is also important consideration for the staff. So the intent of the environmental review process is to disclose and inform the public, decision makers about the potential significant environmental impacts of proposed projects and identify potential mitigation measures to avoid or reduce the impacts. To effectively do this, public agencies are required to adopt specific criteria, objectives, and procedures for implementation of CEQA. To do this, the process requires defining baseline thresholds and exemptions. The baseline typically establishes the existing conditions that are used as a basis of comparison for the expected environmental conditions after the project is implemented. The threshold of significance is defined as the level of effect above which the lead agency will consider impacts to be significant and below which will be considered to be less than significant. Additionally, CEQA guidelines allow for certain projects to be exempted from CEQA consideration. In the context of this presentation, we are only focused on the allowable exemptions from the transportation VMT analysis. Setting the baseline. The baseline, which describes the existing conditions, is determined by taking the total residential VMT in a defined area. In this case, the considerations are citywide, countywide, or regional, and divided by the total population. So this gives us the household VMT per capita. So the population, again, is citywide, countywide, or regional. Or in the case of non-residential projects or office R&D, taking the total employment VMT is defined, is again the same defined areas, citywide, countywide, or region, and divide it by the total number of jobs, and that will give you the employment VMT per employee. In evaluating how baseline and threshold affect the city staff considered the available existing resources within our control that would facilitate VMT reduction. Because there are various coordination efforts in place today at the county level, city staff concluded that these established programs would provide us the ability to successfully reduce VMT and be able to measure and demonstrate VMT reductions. So the chart above illustrates the three baseline conditions. Again, they're separated in household and employment. So they're, for land use projects, they're two distinct CEQA measures. Again, in the staff's evaluation of the different levels of baseline, because of the existence of the county expressway and the county-wide coordination, the VTA is our transit agency, the VTA as the congestion management program, and the countless programs and projects that are implemented at the county level. The staff concluded that the resources were available there to proactively implement the kind of improvements, infrastructure improvements, in order to support VMT reduction. After setting the baseline, the threshold of significance is defined as a percentage below which the impacts would be assessed or not assessed. In this case, the state recommends 15% threshold. The 15% is recommended by the state because after reviewing how 15% reduction would be implemented in the state of California, the state concluded that for a variety of land use types in a variety of areas, that this is generally achievable. So if the project VMT does not meet this goal, then it would equate to they would have to mitigate or they would have a significant impact. So again, the goal is that the project VMT is to be 15% below the baseline VMT. Let's keep going. Along with adopting of the baseline and threshold, the state guidelines recommend that certain developments should be exempt from VMT analysis with a presumption of less than significant impact if the project is likely to reduce VMT. The recommended exemptions include small infill projects, development within half-mile of existing transit stops, affordable residential developments. The state suggests that 100% affordable can be an appropriate level, but leave it up to the cities to define what percentage affordability would be exempt. Local serving retail. The state also recommends that 50,000 square feet of retail or less could be considered local, simply because the retail trips usually support residents, communities, and by placing them closer or proximate to other land uses, you can actually reduce VMT. And so the same thing with affordable residential development, the same thing with small infill projects and transit supportive development. Additionally, by mapping the city's different VMT levels in existing areas where VMT is low, projects that are located in these areas with similar transit-oriented characteristics may also be exempt. So these are some of the deliberations that the staff has to consider when writing this policy. Consistent with the state's recommendation for exemptions with transit-supported projects, this map illustrates the areas in Santa Clara that are within the half-mile of existing major transit stops or high-quality transit corridor and the planned focused growth. My apologies for the map, but if you would take a look at the map. Oh, sorry, let me go back. I was trying to hit, oops. Trying to hit the pointer. Hold it up. Okay, so this gray area here indicates where all of the transit that meets the state's requirement for exemption. Basically, the transit corridor, the transit buffer, is 1/2 mile from the existing transit stops. And so you can kind of see the outline of these gray areas. Nearly 2/3 of Santa Clara is within this buffer. The red areas, the little red, those are the growth areas per the city's general plan. The asterisks indicate that they are within those buffers. So here is Stevens Creek, El Camino, What is this one called, Rena?
That's Stevens Creek. The middle one is El Camino. Then we have Patrick Henry. Not that. That is our Lawrence Station area. Right there is Freedom Circle. Above is Patrick Henry. And the
I
one
think
all
there's
the way to
one.
the north isn't something we're actively working on. So
Okay. So projects within this buffer that meet transit supportive requirements are exempted from VMT analysis.
oh, I should point out, I think the last asterisk is actually the related Santa Clara project. I didn't identify it as a specific plan, but
Okay.
it is a obviously significant project area.
Here.
The asterisk that is there, I think, oh, that's Tasman East. Sorry, that's what it is. It is a specific plan. Thank you.
The state recommends, again, that lead agencies generally should presume that certain projects, including residential, retail, and office, as well as projects that are a mix of these uses, proposed within half-mile of an existing major stop or an existing stop along a high-quality transit corridor. This is defined as all rail transit and major bus routes with a frequency of 15 minutes or less during morning and evening peaks will have less than significant impact on VMT. In addition to proximity to transit, this exemption is predicated on the assumption that the proposed developments are the type of developments that would reduce driving alone. This would be facilitated by projects that propose the following: 0.75 FAR for office retail, 35 dwelling units to the acre for residential. It promotes multimodal transportation, so it's pedestrian-friendly, focused on transit, does not propose excessive parking, transit-oriented in design, and it does not replace affordable residential with fewer market-rate residential. These types of requirements and exemptions, in addition to other conditions, would be included in the city's VMT policy. So for projects to be considered transit supportive projects, they would have to meet all of these criteria. And in addition, the city staff could consider other things to add to that. Other conditions of approval. So I'm going to talk a little bit about heat maps. Heat maps are maps that use color to display large amounts of data. In this case, the heat maps are displaying the VMT levels in the city. The data used to generate the VMT heat maps is based on the travel demand model, the census data, California Household Survey, and other staff-provided land use information. The colors indicate where VMT is higher and lower, areas in the city where people drive more or less. Residential and employment require separate VMT heat maps since the baseline VMT for land uses are different. As noted earlier, the maps can also be a screening tool. In other words, certain projects that are located in the green areas where the VMT is already 15% below the baseline, would already meet the VMT threshold and would require no further VMT analysis. So the heat maps came from the effort of the VTA. The VTAs worked with all of the county cities to comprise in their county model all of the city's existing land use information, how many residents, how many employees. And using that information, they developed these heat maps for each of the cities. This was part of their overall effort to support this transition to VMT. So just very quickly, the legend there indicates, hold that down, oops. Oops. Okay, there we go. This legend indicates how you might interpret the map. The map that you're about to see is the heat map. And again, the green indicates the areas that already are 15% below the baseline. The yellow areas are areas that are at the baseline that would require mitigation. Orange areas will require major mitigation, and red areas are very difficult to mitigate. The residential heat map reflects the countywide average baseline of 13.33 VMT per resident and a 15% threshold of 11.33. The VMT numbers, just very quickly, is at this stage in the establishment of VMT, 13.33 VMT is roughly one direction. And so for residential, each resident generates 13.33 VMT county-wide, and which makes threshold 11.33 VMT. So as you can look at this map, relative to the county, the colors aren't as bright as perhaps on a brighter setting. But you can see the areas. Let's see if I can point them out. This area here is all the green area, and of course, relative to the county, what this map is telling us is placing residential in Santa Clara relative to the county is favorable for reducing VMT. The red area here, and I think there's red area here. This red area right here is probably indicating that there is no transit. These areas up here, really there's no residential to measure. So this heat map actually mimics, they take measurements from around the area and project it. So if we had a residential development that came in here, we would have to use the travel demand model rather than the heat map or the VMT tool to measure VMT for residential. However, the rest of the map indicates areas where there is residential and where placing residential can largely be mitigated. This is the employment heat map. Again, the county-wide average is 16.64, which means that on average, county-wide, people are driving 16.64 miles one way. And the threshold is 14.14. The guideline that the state produced really recommends using a tour-based approach to measuring VMT. There is two methodologies. One is trip-based, one is tour-based. The tour-based is the entire trip coming and going. The trip-based is just one direction. Our travel demand models today are not have not been upgraded enough to measure tour-based. The next set of models that will be coming out from the MTC and subsequently from the VTA will have the capabilities of measuring tour-based modeling. But at this point, because all of the cities collectively, San Francisco, Oakland, most of the cities were using a trip-based model to measure our VMT today. Again, the green areas are the areas for employment that meet the threshold, and this is probably proximate to the station, to the Caltrain station. The orange and yellow areas require mitigation, and as you can see, the red areas up north are difficult to mitigate. Now, you might ask yourself, why with Tasman Light Rail is that area red? Well, this map indicates what people are doing today. And so the travel demand model, the VTA model, will all provide us the information so that we know if people are in fact driving and if people are in fact taking transit or walking or biking. Analyzing transportation projects. The state requires roadway projects that add capacity to evaluate and disclose near-term and long-term induced vehicle miles travel. Additionally, the analysis for transportation projects must also evaluate whether the proposed project will be consistent with the state's GHG reduction goals. If it, as a result of this transportation project, it impacts the multimodal transportation network or makes it harder to access transit, ride a bike, or walk, or if it impacts diversity of land uses, makes it difficult or undesirable to live or work. However, most of the transportation projects within Santa Clara and within the county include significant pedestrian and bicycle improvements. Under VMT and per the state recommendations, most of the transportation projects that improve multimodal transportation could also be exempt from VMT analysis. Measuring level of service. This chart is really intended to compare and contrast the difference between level of service as a CEQA requirement and level of service as an operational analysis. Intersection operations and traffic flow continue to be important to the city and everyone that relies on the roadway network. We're proposing that new development continue to study and monitor signalized intersections. The state guidelines only mandate that LOS cannot be used as a CEQA metric. Most cities, San Jose, Los Angeles, Pasadena, that have already adopted new VMT policies have kept some LOS analysis requirements. Although not considered CEQA, the level of service analysis would now be considered an operational analysis that could indicate whether added traffic from a project results in operational deficiencies. This chart compares level of service, again, as a CEQA metric to LOS as an operational deficiency measure. The main difference is that for a CEQA impact, it would require a mitigation and possibly an override. For an operational deficiency, there would not be a requirement for CEQA mitigation or a CEQA override. However, operational deficiencies that occur as a result of added project traffic can be addressed in several ways. Projects, so here are some of the strategies that the staff could consider in addressing intersection level of service deficiencies. They could, we as staff could apply the same level of service impact criteria, although we would not call it impact, we would call it a deficiency. Projects could, to address a deficiency, they could increase or adopt TDM to reduce the amount of vehicles added to the deficient intersection. They could build turning movements such as left turn capacity or right turn capacity, phasing changes, technology upgrades. All those can improve the signal operations. The state, when they look at induced vehicle demand, or the thing that they're most concerned about, it's throughput, adding another through lane on a roadway. So when you're putting in turning movements, left turns to facilitate movement of traffic, they don't consider those to be growth inducing. And thirdly, if you had a deficiency at an intersection, you could improve the pedestrian, bicycle, or transit accessibility or facilities. And it could address deficiencies by improving the multimodal network and actually providing transportation capacity. The transportation capacity, of course, could be in the form of pedestrian, bike, or transit access improvements. So in addition to the VMT analysis, we're proposing to continue to require transportation operational analysis with the level of service requirement. This would include project-specific, so this operational or local transportation analysis or non-CEQA transportation report would include the following. In addition to level of service, it would include project-specific transportation analysis, such as evaluation of project access and circulation, signal warrant studies, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit assessment and improvements, traffic control, crosswalk evaluation, neighborhood intrusion or cut-through, speeding, parking studies, and also compliance with congestion management program requirements. Today, the laws between Senate Bill 743 and the statute for the CMP are contradicted. The CMP requirement still looks at a congestion measure, and the state is saying that you can't identify congestion measures as a CEQA impact. So we would anticipate that the requirements for the CMP would probably change in the next year or two. However, for today, local cities would still be required to conform to the congestion management program to be eligible for grant funding and everything associated with the gas tax revenues. So there are the most common methods of measuring VMT include travel demand models and VMT evaluation tools or sketch tools. A sketch tool is a simplified, although complex tool that provides a less resource-intensive method for measuring VMT. As part of the transition to VMT, the VTA worked with consultants and all member agencies to produce a county-wide VMT evaluation tool that will likely be the main tool that Santa Clara County will use to evaluate VMT. So there are three specific ways to measure VMT that's listed. The travel demand model typically is used for large projects, land use plans, projects with regional traffic, such as hospitals, private schools. Then for most residential and office projects, you can use the VMT evaluation tool. And then lastly, if the city chose to adopt the heat map as a screening criteria, you can simply look at colors and define a project and make the determination that they would be not be required to do additional VMT analysis. The VMT evaluation tool will measure most residential employment projects. The tool is Excel-based, and it measures each parcel within the county and relies on the travel demand model. The tool provides the VMT mitigation reduction strategies and the algorithms used to calculate project VMT. So this is kind of a redundant slide. I think the most important thing about this tool is it's going to be provided, it's going to be available on the VTA's website for anyone to use at no cost. The tool will provide a consistent method for measuring VMT across the county. It's user-friendly. It requires a project description and address. And the tool can be modified to reflect each city's specific policy requirements. So it's not only, the consultants will be the main users of the tools, but in theory, prospective developers, realtors, the general public, anyone on staff, it is accessible to everyone. This is a little bit about how to reduce VMT. There are really 4 levels of VMT strategy. There's project characteristics, there's infrastructure projects, there's parking strategies, and then there's transportation demand management. To be considered feasible mitigation, there must be substantial evidence that demonstrates the mitigations included in the tool will reduce VMT with quantifiable evidence. In other words, the tool only includes mitigation that has been proven to work and the degree to which the VMT can be reduced. However, if it is the project itself and where it's located that will have the most impact on VMT levels. Projects that provide residents, employees the ability to walk, ride, take transit, that are located close enough to where driving may be less convenient, are all factors that will reduce VMT. Placing housing or employment within the county, again, can also reduce VMT by shortening trip lengths, even if commuters continue to drive. Ideally, good, reliable, attractive transit options will provide a longer-term solution as California continues to grow. So going back to this reduction strategy, these reduction strategies are the basis for the VMT mitigation tool, the tool that we would measure VMT impacts. If you look at the 4 columns, it's very specific to what needs to be constructed or what needs to be conditioned in order to be considered mitigation, and the tool will measure how effective it is based on where it is in the city. So for example, project density, land use diversity, project design, and affordable housing all impact VMT. Under infrastructure, pedestrian-friendly, bike networks, those are improvements that are valid VMT mitigation. Quality and accessibility of external bicycle and pedestrian network. Neighborhood traffic calming improvements, those are VMT mitigations. Accessibility to transit and quality of the transit network. Parking, there's a lot of parking strategies. Again, the number of the amount of parking that a project has, unbundling parking, providing bike parking, and parking pricing. Those are all parking strategies that have been shown to reduce VMT. And then lastly, transportation demand management. Transportation demand management has been very successful, particularly with employment, where employment can provide the incentive to promote TDM measures. So again, examples of them are ride sharing, telecommuting, commute trip reductions, car sharing. The list goes on. I think there's 24 possible VMT mitigation measures in the tool. All right. First of all, I have to apologize for this slide. This slide is an actual project that we measured in Santa Clara. The format of the slide is, this is the output from the tool. There is an output report that is produced that's about 6 pages long. We cut out really the important parts of the output. So I'm going to try to walk through this slowly and in hopes that you can get a better understanding of how VMT is measured. So let's focus first on the project description. So this was a project. It was called North San Jose, Santa Clara office. It was a proposed 500,000 square foot office with 1,500 parking spaces. The baseline was the county-wide baseline, so this is where we started. And this is the goal. This is the threshold. So this project was in an orange area, meaning that it would require mitigation. So let's just look at this chart. There's so much going on. The dashed line is the threshold, so that is the target. The solid line is the most amount of VMT reduction that you can possibly take in this area. So what that means is it's assessing whether there's the availability of transit, if there's a good bike or walking network. This happens to be fairly high. So this first bar right here indicates that the area without a project, just this parcel, the existing VMT is almost 16. So it's pretty high, even though the baseline countywide is 16.64, it's still higher. In the higher areas of Santa Clara, this is orange. So then you add the project. So this is just, you take the tool and you input the project description. So you're adding density and you're adding jobs to an area that, that hopefully provides density. In this case, this project there must not be available transit proximate to, and I know because I ran this, there was not a lot of good transit here. So when we inputted the project and the number of parking spaces, it barely went down. So the last thing that you would do is you would look at what VMT mitigations are available to you. So going through the tool, the user would select what mitigation measures that they would like to be included in their project. They were able to get it down to 14.02, and that's the ending VMT with the mitigations. So they came down from so the area went from 16, nearly 16, to 14. So that's a pretty decent reduction, 2 VMT miles for each employee. So let's look at this chart right here. This is the mitigation that took to get it down. So the tool is very specific on how effective and how successful VMT mitigation is. In this case, what this chart is telling us that in order to mitigate, the developer or the development had to commit to 50% requiring or providing 50% of their employees a parking cash-out program. 50% of their employees would be eligible for a transit subsidy. 100% of their employees would be paying for parking. And 17% of their employees would have to participate in a ride-sharing program, carpooling, shuttles, etc. With all of those things combined, they were able to mitigate the project. This is actually quite a bit of mitigation for TDM, and you can see that these TDM measures really, the measurement for TDM in the tool is a lot more subtle than, say, how we've been measuring TDM before, because this is based on actual data from actual sites. This is our second example. This is a residential project, mixed-use residential on El Camino. Hopefully this isn't as intimidating now that you've seen it. Again, looking at the chart, on El Camino, this was not exempted because it didn't meet the definition of transit priority. It wasn't dense enough. So it wouldn't be exempt. However, the area of El Camino is already fairly low. So if you look, this is the area VMT before the project. It says that it's already at 9.76. So again, the countywide baseline is 13.33. The threshold is 11.33. This is our target. The area is already below it. And then again, you put the project in, the density on El Camino caused it to go even lower. And so in this case, we did not put any mitigation because ultimately the VMT, the project, this mixed use project, residential and commercial on El Camino at this density was going to inherently reduce the VMT. Last example. So again, this is a project off of Winchester. It's proposing 375 units, half of them affordable, a small commercial element using the countywide baseline. This project actually also comes in very low. So the area VMT, based on the county average, is already below the 13.33 baseline and already below the VMT threshold of 1133. Same thing with the last project, doesn't need any mitigation. That isn't to say that the city could look at these projects that are easily mitigated and not include more conditions as a condition of approval. It just means from the CEQA document that these residential projects are favorable in Santa Clara because they will reduce VMT countywide. So lastly, this is our schedule. We are still intending to take a policy to hearing in June because of the way things are right now. It is possible it could get pushed out to July. We'll just have to see. We're moving ahead until we're told otherwise. We will have a council study session in May. It'll likely be the same study session as this one, where again we will be soliciting more feedback on the staff's evaluation. And this concludes the presentation, and I think we're ready to go on to Q&A.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to start with questions. As I said before at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to start with everybody, and they're going to go with 3 questions each. And after your 3 questions, we're going to move on, but then we can come back for another round of questions. So I'm going to start off with Commissioner Ikezi. Would you take it?
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I've been thinking of my 3 top questions all along. Okay, the first question is, what does exempt from VMT mean? Does this mean that no traffic analysis is required, no mitigation is required?
Thank you. Exempt from VMT means that they don't have to do a VMT analysis. However, the staff is recommending that even though they don't do a VMT analysis, they would still do a transportation operational analysis where they would still look at level of service, neighborhood issues, pedestrian, bike, and transit accessibility, and any other operational deficiency that's in the area of the project.
Okay, what is the relationship between the heat map and the that map with the gray shades near the transit?
That's a great question. The heat map represents the amount of driving that the residents and employees are doing in Santa Clara. The buffer or the transit overlay are those areas where if a project is a transit supportive project, it would be exempt from VMT analysis. So if a project's located in those buffer areas, the state has indicated that those buffer areas have the appropriate amount of transit to be exempt. And so again, those projects that are at least 0.75 floor area ratio, 35 dwelling units to the acre, transit supportive, not underparked, but not overparked, and focused on transit and multimodal. Those are the kinds of projects that would be exempted. If a project did not meet those requirements, they would be required to do VMT analysis even within those buffered areas.
Even with the buffered areas, even if if they're in the green heat map area, I mean.
Yes.
Okay. My last third question is, so it says the transit supportive. You mentioned you showed the criteria for transit supportive requirements for residential.
Yes.
What about commercial?
So the commercial is under, if you look at the exemption for commercial, commercial has a 50,000 square
Excuse me,
foot.
I'm sorry. Which page is that?
So if you look at page 12.
Page 12. Okay. Development near
Oh, I'm sorry,
transit.
page 13. Sorry about that.
Page 13.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
My
so,
page 13 is blank. Can you pop that up again, please?
oh, absolutely. Let's see, backwards.
In the file I received, page 13 is blank. That's why.
Oh,
Please put the slides on the screen.
okay. Oh, there it is. All right. So transit supportive requirements. The FAR, the floor area
Oh,
ratio.
I can't see it on my screen. I'm sorry, I can't see it on my screen yet.
Oh, okay. Let me give you a second. Okay.
Okay, there it is.
So for office projects, the FAR, the floor area ratio, is no less than 0.75. For residential units, it's 35 units to the acre, and the rest of these apply to whether it's office projects or residential. The state says at a minimum you should adopt these requirements. The city can always adopt more if that's what the desire is.
Okay, so the FAR is no less than 0.75. Does that mean, like, we're seeing some projects with a really high FAR for the office project? So those are considered transit supportive and exempt from the analysis?
That is correct. So this is a minimum. The minimum
what is the
is.
logic behind that? What is the logic behind that? Because if you have a super high density office, it's going to create a lot of traffic.
The logic behind the state's recommendation is, frankly, in order for transit to be successful and in order for transit to be sustainable, you have to have the density in order to have the ridership. One of the issues that we have in the Bay Area is we don't have the density or the massing to support successful transit. The ridership, it's so complicated with why people do or don't ride transit. But in the evaluation of cities that have successful transit, one of the characteristics is density. And so for the state,
Okay,
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. But that's only one component of reducing traffic. You need the density firstly to encourage the transit. But if there's no transit, then you're still not going to have the traffic reduction. And so these rules don't ensure that the presence of transit. So how is that addressed?
So this is a plan for the future. This is intended to stop the way that we are growing today, where we are running out of space to accommodate more vehicles, and yet California as a state is still growing. And so the intention of the state, again, going back to air quality, is to change the way that we have been developing as cities. And so that's what their logic is.
Oh, okay. So they're on the theory that if you build higher density, then the transit will come.
That is correct, and not only higher density, but also other things. Interestingly enough, by focusing your development in these growth corridors, you actually protect some of your single-family neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you very much for the 3 questions.
May I jump in just very briefly, please? This is Alexander, the Assistant City Attorney. Just in response to Commissioner Kezi's question, I just wanted to point out that the transit supportive requirements only apply to developments that are within a half mile of a transit stop or station or a high-quality transit corridor. So you're concerned that there wouldn't be transit near these developments. That's actually the opposite. There has to be transit for this.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah, this is a lot of stuff to digest, but okay, thanks for putting that
I'm with you. I agree.
Okay. And then if you're outside of this half mile of transit, then you look at the heat map. Is that the order of, like, how the decision tree?
Yes.
Okay, understood. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
I yield.
All right. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ikezi. And I just want to remind my fellow commissioners and also our viewers at home and whoever's watching that there will be a little bit of a buffer time between where we can see a slide and the delay of time because of the 10-second delay. So next, we're going to go to Commissioner Jane.
Thank you. So I think it's very appropriate that we're talking about VMT on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So happy Earth Day, everyone. So many people have noticed that the air is so much cleaner during this COVID shutdown. And people in Delhi can actually see blue sky again. And people all over the world are realizing that they can see mountains off in the distance. So reducing driving is not only a matter of reducing GHG, but also results in cleaner and healthier air. So my first question is, there's a difference between a high quality transit stop, which is 15-minute headways, and a regular just bus stop. And how are those different in these gray zones?
The VTA provided the map. Sorry, I was too close. The VTA mapped out what the state defined as high quality transit, based on a 15-minute headway during peak hour. That maps out those bus transit, rail, or bus facilities that meet the requirement. So there are other bus lines in Santa Clara. However, they don't meet the requirement for frequency, and so they were left out. So that's what that map does map.
Okay, so these maps are basically continually changing because, these maps are basically continually changing because VTA is always changing its routes. So how is a developer supposed to get any type of visibility into what it's going to be like when their project is actually opened or occupied?
I think that that's a great question. All of the assumptions are somewhat fluid. If the city is effective, the baseline should be going down every year. The VTA acknowledges in all of their maps that because of the uncertainty that they are subject to change. And so I would think with the network of communication and programs that we would be at the table while they were discussing this. Right before they brought the heat maps out for us earlier this year, they informed us that they were cutting service, and that caused them to have to scramble and redo the maps. And so you are correct. That definitely will be a challenge. And one of the challenges from the city standpoint is when to update these things. From a developer standpoint, it would be great to update them every year so we can see our progress. However, if you're doing an environmental document, that would be difficult. So we're going to have to kind of think about when are the right times to benchmark, when are the right times to look at our assumptions and make adjustments.
Okay. So I think the state had recommended the 15% threshold based on a variety of land use types in various parts of the state. But we're in a very congested part of the state already. And on September 25th of last year, we had an expert, Elizabeth Hughes from TDM Specialties, I believe, come and talk about how Santa Clara has always set its TDM thresholds far less than neighboring cities. And they said that she would never go lower than 20%, but should really try for 25%. And she actually says that if you're near a Caltrain station, your TDM should be 30 to 35%, because a larger percentage of those people are already going to be riding transit. So the 15%, how are we sort of bound by that, or what can we do to adjust that?
That is a recommendation from the state. We as a city could choose a more stringent recommendation. We could increase. I think the maximum that is available to us when the tool is about 20%. Now, again, going back to the 15%, there are areas in the city, because of the availability or the non-availability, that you can't achieve 35%. So the way that the VMT tool measures is it looks at what is available and makes assumptions based on, again, studies that have been done in other cities. And there is a belief that there's a ceiling. Now, I did watch the presentation, so things like trip caps, which is a really aggressive way to address VMT. That kind of it forces a developer to target a number, and they have to do it in very aggressive ways. Not certainly the tool can't measure that, but perhaps a travel demand model could.
And if I could just jump in as well, in response to Commissioner James' question, the city sets its own thresholds of significance. So certainly the 15% is something that the city could adopt. You could also adopt something more stringent as your threshold of significance. The catch is you need to have some substantial evidence for whatever you adopt. There has to be some basis for the number you select. So it can't just be, 17 is our favorite number, so we go with 17. There has to be some data supporting the rationale for us choosing whatever the number is. But you do have some discretion in going higher than what the state has recommended.
So the rationale could be that almost all of our intersections are LOSF?
That's certainly a relevant fact. But I would suggest we actually, if you had a number in mind, it would be good to see whether it's feasible to meet that goal. Is it going to mean that every single project is going to be significant, unavoidable? Are developers going to be able to build projects and without having to, are they able to do it financially feasible methods to get the numbers down? If we had some data just to back up whatever the goal is before we adopted the goal, that would be the evidence we needed.
Thank you.
And I guess I would point out also that the state has said that we cannot consider congestion measures as sequometrics. So the state really wants cities not to measure a level of service. So I would suspect that they would not consider that to be substantial evidence.
Thank you.
Was it Commissioner James?
That's my 3.
Okay. Let's move on to Commissioner Salam.
Okay, I had to unmute. So hopefully I posed these questions. I actually had some time to write them. So when projects are exempt due to the proximity to the transit corridors, how are the cumulative impacts of multiple exempt projects measured and aggregated? Because after a certain point, you know, if you have multiple very high densities, they're going to at some point impact. And I'm not sure if they're all exempt, you're ever going to see that impact happen. Short of experiencing it.
So interestingly enough, cumulative impact for VMT is really a city's general plan. So if a project builds consistent with the general plan, the cumulative impact is the city's adopted plan. For that reason, there really isn't a requirement to do cumulative, again, because the state believes that the density is a catalyst for multimodal travel. Again, shifting people out of their vehicles.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. As an engineer, I see that as a pending problem because usually it's all fine and good until it's not. With no measurement of how to predict that this is coming, every project by itself is going to be okay until all of them together aren't. There's no amount of transit you could put in place once the density reaches a certain level that is beyond the capacity of the transit that's available. All right, so second question. So let's say, can an employee-based company use work at home as a mitigation when it's a stated policy for the company to reduce days per week and thus reducing VMT? In other words, are there mitigations at the project level that don't involve actual increase of the available transit, but they can also still count their reduction in VMT? Because did you follow that? I hope I stated it well.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
This is the same project example one, only we ran it with the regional baseline. You probably don't remember in the original slide, there was 4 mitigation measures that were identified. In this case, to mitigate the regional VMT, we needed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mitigation to bring it down to the acceptable levels. But I brought this slide up because this is an example of the variety of mitigations available that have been shown to reduce VMT. And one of them is telecommuting and alternative work schedules. The tool allows you to select how many days a week, and that is an effective, valid mitigation.
Okay. Yeah, I missed that when I was looking at the slide originally, or I would have just skipped this question. Okay, that's good. Well, because I think the current virus crisis has shown that working at home is a really amazing way of reducing travel. Yeah, because you can.
It sure is.
Last question. Do any of the projects have weighted modifiers by their classification of use, like amusement parks and stadiums with very high density and low likely shared transit? Because people don't take their families to the amusement parks or to the stadiums on the bus usually. They usually pack up and drive. So are there any differentiators that are applied on projects by their classification?
There are. I mean, if I can describe that, when we're measuring impact, VMT impact, we're focusing on the land use. And so for residential, we look at that 15% below the baseline. For office projects, again, we look at 15% below the baseline. For travel that's associated with regional draw, that's a whole different analysis. And so for a shopping center like Westfield that exceeds the 50% exemption, the assumption is, and the travel demand tells us, that a project the size of Westfield draws regional traffic. And so you have to use a travel demand model to measure the impact of how much traffic or how many VMT miles you produce. So where you were talking about zoos and any kind of hospitals even, those have to be measured differently, and they use a model to look at the total amount of VMT that is generated. I hope I answered that question.
No, that's great, because I really didn't see the differentiation happening in the examples, but I guess it has to. And who classifies these projects? Obviously not the developers themselves. That's going to be someone on staff at the city making a first pass and saying, well, you are building a shopping center, therefore you're under this classification. That all happens pre-presentation to the Planning Commission, right?
I would think that we would have to include descriptions in the policy to help our staff be able to identify those. And I would think in some kind of guideline that it would be available for prospective developers to have access to.
Okay, good. That's my 3.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Slam. Next, we're going to go to Commissioner Chair Kuru.
Chair, thank you, staff, and to all their happy Administrative Professionals Day. We really appreciate everything you're doing, and this presentation has been really great. I appreciate bringing it forward. So just want to clarify, to do a traffic analysis, you would need to be in a yellow, orange, or red zone and generate over 110 trips. Am I paraphrasing this? When do we require a traffic analysis?
That is correct. Any project that is not exempted per the city's policy and those would be definitely yellow, orange, red, outside of the buffer, or any project that didn't meet the buffer requirements. But the city could also require a VMT analysis for green areas. We just already know what the answer is going to be.
So staff has the discretion, and it's going to be on a project by project basis where the traffic analysis is going to be required. I mean, how would a developer or
the policy will provide the direction, and the policy will the direction will come from the state. What is exempted? What is a transit supportive project? What are the requirements for yellow, red, and orange? So we will follow the state at a minimum, but we could also include, we could add to the state's requirements.
Okay, thank you. For the second question, could you clarify what were the contradicting or things that are anticipated to change with the congestion management program as opposed to the VMT?
Can you repeat that?
What were the issues that you saw or noted that the congestion management program, the CMP, was at odds with the state recommendations on the VMT adoption?
The measure, so the CMP requirements are that the acceptable level of service for regional intersections, the expressways, the ramps, major intersections, is level of service E or better. And that intersections have been identified to have significant impact if the E degrades to an F, or an already functioning F has a 4-second delay increase. That is the definition of an impact to a CMP facility. That is a congestion measure. So the state is now saying congestion measures can no longer be a CEQA impact. So I would say that for the time being, the traffic analysis would still study CMP intersections and would really call it not a CEQA impact, but a conformance impact. So we would say project intersections that didn't meet the CMP threshold. I wouldn't even call it a threshold anymore. The CMP requirement, E or better, are out of conformance with the CMP program. We would still require improvements to bring it back into conformance. We just wouldn't call it a CEQA impact or a mitigation. So that I think, although it is a bit of wordsmithing, it's really removing the word congestion from and impact from looking at a CMP intersection.
Got it. I mean, the reason I asked is in CMP, and I think I may be wrong, but widening roads is one of their, you know, impact mitigation possible recommendations. But VMT, does it still consider road widening as a mitigation, or does it say it's not a good idea right now to widen the road? You just have to look at infill.
You could still widen roads. You would just have to disclose the impacts of widening your road. And so the state is saying the county continues to widen the expressways. You know, Caltrans may continue to widen freeways. It is just, you have to, in your environmental document, say that this induces a certain amount of VMT. That's the measure of impact for transportation projects. So you have to disclose that in a CEQA document.
Got it. Thank you. And last question, I think it follows the lines of what Vice Chair was saying. Definitions of local serving is very important because I've personally encountered projects where the local serving, so much as just a commercial salon, became what was the draw? Was this exclusive, and was it anticipated to be a regional draw? So the definition of the radii or the anticipated volume is going to be really critical in our policy. So I completely see that.
Thank you. Staff, we will look at our definition of local serving and make sure that it doesn't create any unintended consequences. San Jose adopted a 100,000 square foot local serving because that was the size of a typical Safeway shopping center with the ancillary retail, where the Safeway was about 60,000. However, when the projects come in and they have a 5,000 square foot addition, it's now a regional shopping center. And so that's an unintended consequence of not describing well enough what you mean by local serving. So knowing what we know, I think the staff can have some more in-depth conversations and try to describe exactly what local serving means in Santa Clara.
Thank you. That I think is very appropriate. Yes, I know of situations of that. Thank you. I'll defer the questions till everything else is done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cherukuru. Let's see. Next, we're going to go with Commissioner Biagini.
Hi there. Thanks, Chair Becker. So this is an awful lot for me to digest. And let me just say, in layman's terms here, I'm trying to fit the pieces together of all these diverse acronyms and concepts in order to better understand formulating the important policy matters that we have in front of us. Here's my question. Forgive me if I'm not saying it very well. I think you were touching on it, Commissioner Cherukuru. There's LOS and there's VMT. Now, if you get to a situation where, I was kind of thinking El Camino Real, where the VMT measures wouldn't satisfy the LOS thresholds from before. It still is an impact for residents that live not too far off of ECR. So how can the city formulate some sort of policy, and I kind of say this a little bit at risk here, that would overlay LOS into the VMT requirements that would satisfy the state? Does that question make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Um,
Okay.
so,
I know the state doesn't like LOS, but I know that residents are going to have concerns when they're at a stoplight too long.
so let me walk through how a VMT analysis is done, and then we can address the level of service implications. So the VMT is measured for a project, and let's say as a result of the VMT impact, they implemented some TDM and it reduced the VMT. That equates to less traffic on the roadway. And then when you take that traffic and you distribute it in the surrounding areas of the project, and it can cause a level of service impact, right? It can cause the level of service to degrade. So with the proposal that the staff was considering was that we would still identify that as an intersection operational deficiency, and that it would require developer to address that. And they could address it by reducing the amount of traffic even further in their TDM plan. So another couple TDM measures that reduce the amount of traffic. They could increase the transportation capacity. And when not traffic, so let's say they can't build more left turn pockets. There's already 2 there in the lanes, and it's a 6-lane facility. They can install bike lanes. They could improve the pedestrian connections. They could improve the access to transit. They could upgrade the traffic signal. They could upgrade the technology. All of those things would improve the flow with the added cars, or create capacity for not necessarily vehicles, but for pedestrians, cyclists, and or access to transit. The third, and of course, another option is to actually build the traffic mitigation in the way that we would for an LOS impact. If you had a single left turn and the second left turn had not been constructed yet, the project could simply go ahead and build that second left turn. That doesn't, the state doesn't consider those vehicle inducing. And so we could address operational deficiencies in different ways other than just roadway widening.
Okay, so then let me try this follow-up. I hear what you're saying, that you can address what ends up having an LOS impact in a nearby area by creating what I would call other moving capacities, walk more, bike more, things of that nature. Would that then be something that a city could put into its policy separate from CEQA requirements, nonetheless a city policy, so you don't run into some sort of interesting roadblocks with the state? And the reason that I say that is, if anything COVID has taught me, is that we live in a rather fluid environment where things can change in a way that one would have never expected. So if you could comment on that.
So I'm going to say yes, but then I'm going to let Xander put his 2 cents in on that.
All right.
Well, I think, Commissioner, in response to the input you provided at prior meetings, we are intending to retain LOS as a non-CEQA analysis. I imagine it will remain in our environmental documents even for the time being, because that's where they have always been housed. So certainly where it is possible to, in Ms. Mack's last example, where it is possible to build that second left turn lane, we will still build that. But it just won't be a CEQA mitigation measure. It won't be a CEQA impact or a CEQA mitigation measure. It'll be a deficiency and it'll be a condition of approval. So we are not intending to abandon them, but we are intending to expand our palette when it comes to the options we have in front of us. And we may have more flexibility this way as well, because with CEQA, you are required to mitigate the precise impact that you've identified and can only do so to the level of non-significance under CEQA. Here, if we determine that, well, this intersection is bad, but there are additional TDM measures that will improve it and also have some tertiary benefits, it may expand our repertoire of options. Anyway, that's a long yes.
Well, it matched my long question, but thank you, because that did help me kind of fit the pieces together on how you make policy that works. Thanks.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Biagini. Next up is Commissioner Kelly.
Okay. First off, what does the term parking cash out mean?
Parking cash out is a incentive that typically it could apply to residential. It could apply to businesses where if a person does not need a parking space, they would be given a certain amount of money to give up their parking space. So it's an incentive to not drive.
Okay, and that applies to office as well?
Yes, it does.
Okay. All right. And then when we're looking at the coded map, you said green, pretty much right now, they don't have to do any mitigation, but areas of yellow, orange, and red, they would have to make some mitigation measures, but red areas, it's very hard to mitigate. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then once we see this, we would take advantage of the VM tool to see how we could potentially mitigate and what is a reasonable mitigation target. Because right now, we kind of listen to what the developer says, and then we ask them to go back to the drawing board. But what you're saying is we all will be able to use the VM tool to play around with it to see what is a reasonable mitigation number for the developer, correct?
That is correct. They have to select from a list of approved mitigations.
Okay. And then are we going to have like maybe a demo on how to play around with it to come up with things that we might suggest in a meeting?
This is Rena. I just wanted to clarify, because I think Karen Mack may have not fully heard your question when you asked it, Commissioner Kelly. I think you were saying that you were understanding that the tool would be able to be utilized by, say, the planning commissioners to kind of check on the fly, what kind of TDMs could result from alternative mitigations. And so is it true that the public, anyone, the commissioners will be able to play around with the project and potential TDMs?
That is correct. It is available at no cost to anyone that wants to play with it. And we would be glad to show you or anyone how to use it. It is not available yet, but it will be.
On the city's website?
It will be available on the VTA's website, and I believe it's in May when they're going to open it up.
Okay, got it. All right. Those were my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Kelly. Okay, we got Commissioner Jane.
Commissioner Becker, you didn't have a chance yet, but I'm happy to take another round.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, my only words are great presentation, very informative. A little concerned on, I think a lot of our roads do need a lot more repair and expansion, but then again, with all the work from home, that could be discussed later on. But go ahead, Commissioner Jane.
Yeah, so one of the things is that this change seems to sort of incentivize us to put a lot of density in. And so a large office building on a transit line is considered to be basically doesn't require a traffic analysis per CEQA. But the interesting thing is that Santa Clara has a very high jobs to housing ratio at 2.89 or something. So adding a lot more jobs, even on transit, is going to add a lot of traffic to our city because people are coming from outside. Does that play any consideration into how we can add more conditions to the state's requirements of 15% or density or anything else?
Sure. Just because a project is located in the buffer doesn't mean that the staff is not going to study traffic. We would still do the level of service analysis. We would do the CMP analysis. We would look at, again, project circulation to see what the project needed to function safely, pedestrian improvements, and I would expect there would be conditions from that operational analysis outside of the VMT. Additionally, again, the requirements to be considered a transit supportive project could be expanded.
Okay. Yeah, it just seems to me that adding more jobs when you have a very high jobs to housing ratio should have more conditions to it. Okay, so the other question I had was that the TDM specialist that presented to us said that Santa Clara's VMT and TDM policies were much weaker than, say, Mountain View and Sunnyvale. So I imagine some other cities have already adopted SB 743. Do you have any idea as to if they went beyond the state's basic recommendations?
I do. I would say that San Francisco went beyond the state's recommendation. They stopped implementing the level of service policy almost 10 years ago in many areas of San Francisco. So they loved and embraced the VMT policy, but they also adopted a TDM ordinance that required each project to do TDM, to select 2 or 3, I don't know exact number, but TDM measures with every development. They adopted a TMA, which is a Transportation Management Association policy, that all businesses and residents, developments would have to participate. And so they, in addition to VMT, they adopted these sister policies or partner policies that really equate to more conditions on their developments. San Jose pretty much abided by the state's recommendations. Sunnyvale right now is looking to kind of mirror what Santa Clara is doing. I think the same recommendations that were the staff's making on Santa Clara. The same Sunnyvale staff is also making those same recommendations. Mountain View. So Mountain View, again, has been overriding local intersections for years, and that's why their TDM plans are so stringent. They have been using TDM plans as traffic mitigation for years. I believe they're using the county threshold, they're using the city threshold, and they're using 15%. So again, slightly different. And they did also add some conditions over and above what the state is requiring.
Can we get a list of those somehow?
Sure, I can. I think Mountain View just had their second study session, so it's online, and I'll be glad to forward the information.
Okay, and then my last question's quick. Does this change imply that there's going to be fewer EIRs for projects?
Not necessarily. We do go through the CEQA checklist to look at all the possible areas that we have to analyze. Traffic is many times the reason why projects in Santa Clara in recent years have had significant impacts that couldn't be maybe avoided without mitigations. And so it is possible that we will see less EIRs. Yes, if we are building dense projects where the state is recommending that we build them, then this is intended really to facilitate that type of development. So this legislation, law by the state was really intended for that purpose.
And if I might add, one of the main reasons why transportation impacts have been overridden is because of regional facilities and freeway impacts. So most cities override freeway impacts, and that requires an EIR. The measure of impacts on freeways is no longer a congestion measure. So the Caltrans will be coming up with their own requirements on how to measure, when projects add traffic to regional facilities, but will no longer be the congestion on the main lines of the freeways. The same thing with the county expressways. They're going to have to look at their measures and also modify them in some way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jane. I have a few questions myself, or 3 questions. So TDM, I was hearing before with piggybacking after a few other commissioners, 35%, is that way too much to ask? Because I think it might be a little fair.
It depends on where you are in the city. I would think that areas that are served by light rail and also Caltrans have a huge bandwidth. If we could get the mode shift, I would estimate that we could probably see some big reductions. If we didn't have transit, it's the availability of transit, it would be much more difficult. Let me see if I can pull that.
Okay.
Let me see this one.
No problem.
I just want to point out this in the first example for an office project in North Santa Clara office. Again, looking at this crazy bar chart, the black line, the tool does something for us. The dashed line indicates what our threshold is, the level that the cities have to reduce the project has to reduce the VMT. The black line indicates the lowest VMT you could get given the available facilities. So you can see here that it can be mitigated at 14, but the tool says, well, you can actually reduce your VMT down to 12.76. We as one of the member agencies in the VTA committee debated about this black line, but I think it's great information. Let's look at the next one. This one is a great example. According to this, the threshold is 11.33, but in this area, this black line indicates you can go down to 5.86. So just something to think about.
Thank you. Thank you. And my next question is about, let's see here. Well, you were talking about rail lines. Now, my major concern is now a lot of people currently are relying on driving in their cars with the pandemic because they don't want to take public transit and there's fear of taking public transit. So I'm worried that maybe this stigma, I hope it doesn't last for another year or so. What would you say? Would you say that mainly a lot of things I hear a lot of the issue with public rail lines and transit is that it's not as often for a lot of people that are trying to commute from far areas, but they work here in the city of Santa Clara, or they work at local cities nearby. Are there more plans in the future to increase all these rail lines to increase more accessibility for far distances, as well as having more accessibility for localities?
Yes, I have heard this number at the VTA. The estimate is that we have 1/5 the transportation network we need to support multimodal travel. So we're so early in the game in terms of the availability of transit that we have a lot and a long way to go to really create successful transit. And I think one of the goals of VMT is to build out the transportation network.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, oh, actually, sorry, that was a combined question, so that I'm fine with that. I would like to ask about, so are we going to move to questions from the public or any public comments, or are we going to continue moving on?
I have more questions. I mean.
Oh yeah, I understand that when we have more questions, because I want to know how we're going to do this. Because usually with a voting way, I'm looking here at the way we're going to do this. We can move to public comment, and then we can go back to commissioner comments. And do we make recommendations or anything in this?
So this is Rena. We actually don't have any speakers here. However, we can leave some time if individuals want to, alert the public if they would like to submit any e-comments. We can, alert them that this would be a good time to do that. So we have some time, maybe 5 minutes, so that we can check the e-comments and read if we've received any. We did receive one piece of correspondence before the meeting, and Elizabeth Elliott forwarded it to everyone, but we can have Elizabeth read it into the part of it into the record. But it's really for the commission to, this is not a meeting in which you have to, unless you want to, take a vote on a particular, set of recommendations or whatnot. We're just here to get your feedback so that in this next month that we're fine-tuning this work, that we come back taking into account your input so that we bring a policy forward that takes that feedback into account. So, if we can use this time judiciously to go through your questions, and then if there's really statements that the commission would like to have to give us any further direction on, that would be very helpful as well.
Okay. All right. Well, let's. I guess according to what Attorney Zander said last time, which was advertise to email for anyone to email in, and take 5 minutes, and then just continue the questioning then, or comments. Sorry.
Correct. So it's for individuals to use the e-comment feature. We believe that's working tonight.
Yes, it's working. E-comment on the website. Yes.
Okay. So let's move to let's do the public hearing section and open it up for comments. And Elizabeth could just read some of the lines from that comment when we get to that point.
There were 2 emails that were received. They're rather lengthy. I will try to just kind of summarize. One is from Betsy Magus. It says, "To the Planning Commission," and I'd like to clarify, these emails were sent to all commissioners already, so you should have these. So back to the email. I am glad that you are taking the opportunity to study the city's progress so far on the transition from LOS to VMT for traffic impact evaluation under CEQA, and I look forward to watching online tonight. Your packet says there is no additional cost to the city other than staff time. In the longer term and the bigger picture, I think that is a huge oversimplification and underestimation. The city has the opportunity to save a great deal of money by reducing the number of cars and car miles on its roads. As we've seen during the shelter in place, our roads are a very different experience when there are fewer cars. They are quieter, safer, and more efficient for walking and bicycling without traffic congestion. They are more efficient for essential motor vehicles. Our air quality, along with air quality around the world, is better than it's been in many years. Poor air quality has real cost to public health, to the local environment, and to climate. Poor air quality, traffic congestion, and noise also degrade the sense of place and the ability to walk and bike in a neighborhood. The next section talks about car crashes appear to be reduced due to the shelter in place as well. And there are some statistics there. Moving on, more directly, cars require a tremendous amount of space to move around and to store both on and off public streets. The Planning Commission's recent reduction in parking at the related projects saved somewhere between $35,000 and $55,000 per space that was eliminated. The cost of free parking gets passed along to taxpayers or to tenants and then to retail customers. Cars also cost individuals in the neighborhood of $10,000 per car per year in purchase price / depreciation, fuel, insurance, and maintenance. To say nothing of the cost to individual health and time that come with sedentary commutes and the stresses of being stuck in traffic. Because of our land use and transportation choices, options for shopping, housing, and jobs are limited for those who cannot afford to maintain a car or cannot drive. Some cities, including Oakland and San Francisco, are creating slow streets or open streets for walking and bicycling during the shelter in place. Milan, for one, is now looking to open up afterwards so as to encourage a more active transportation. To end.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth.
Good, thank you.
Any other comments?
There is the second email. Did you want to hear that one also?
Yes, go ahead for 2 minutes.
This is from Diane Harrison. Dear Planning Commission, I read the item. I agree with a lot of the issues raised in December, and I completely support everything that Betsy states below. I'd like to add a consideration of personally owned bicycles to that for shared bicycles, particularly with regard to making transportation by both as safe and convenient as possible. Every one of us using a bicycle for utilitarian purposes means one less car filling up the roadways. One change you may have not yet considered would be traffic circles at most intersections currently controlled by stop signs. Both bikes and cars would benefit, thus increasing both VMT and LOS for such intersections. And then there was an attachment, and it was a presentation that Ms. Harrison had made to the October BPAC meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, so I think to reduce time and make everything a little faster, I'm going to ask Xander to advertise to where to email, and then once we put that up on the screen, we'll have about a minute for that to be flashed on the screen, and then we're going to go straight back to comments and questions from the rest of the commission and see if anyone does send anything in that amount of time we're taking questions to, go over in the end of the meeting.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. Actually, this time, because the e-comment function is working, we're actually asking people to use our e-comment link on the city's website. That website address was posted on the agenda, and I'll just read it now. santaclara.legistar.com/calendar.aspx. And the Planning Commission is the first item on that web page. If you just click on e-comment, you're able to submit comments on this item.
Thank you. All right, let's go to Commissioner Ikezi.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. How the analysis is going to be conducted if we were to adopt the VMT standards. So the first step I understand is that is the project near the high quality transit, and does it meet these requirements on page 13? And if they do, no analysis required. And then you look at the heat map. So how is the heat map going to be used in the analysis? Because in the examples that were presented, I didn't see the heat map mentioned.
The heat map is actually the tool that, along with the travel demand model, that provides these numbers. So I did not show you the heat map, but the 11.33 and those do come from the heat maps. But we mentioned earlier map-based screening. So the city has the ability to decide if certain types of developments in those green areas could be exempt. That's also another decision that city staff could make. They don't have to adopt that, but that's also an option, map-based screening.
So heat map plus the nature of the project, the size, etc. That's how you come up with the expected vehicle miles traveled. Is that how that works?
That is exactly how it works.
Okay. Now I'm starting to get it. Thank you. All right. Now,
just real quick, the travel demand model estimates the direction and the lengths that people are traveling and how many jobs and how many houses are in a geographic area. And then it is placed into it's basically a spreadsheet that assigns it a VMT level based on the length of the trip. And then the heat map uses color to represent those lengths. And then that's used to feed the tool.
Okay, that spreadsheet, that's going to be on VPA side. Okay. All right. So my next question is, so if it turns out that you need like a mitigation, is the number of mitigation, the level of mitigation, or what you have to do, is that going to be determined by the VMT level?
Yes. So in the examples, it indicates in different areas of Santa Clara how the VMT, how long the trip is. And so the mitigation is really really intended to address that trip length and reduce them. So the tool the tool has the tools to reduce the VMT.
Okay, so is the developer going to get to decide which mitigations to adopt, or is it going to be completely prescribed? If you're at this level, you're going to do this and this and this.
So based on the tool, typically it's the consultants that run them, but yes, a developer could go in and look at the tools. But San Jose, what they did was they looked at the different tools, and what they really wanted, they wanted to get first and foremost improvements to their multimodal, so more crosswalks, more, and so they prioritized those and said, you have to select one of these first and then go to your TDMs. So you could do that too.
I see. And I think you also mentioned that in San Francisco, there are certain things that everybody has to do for TDM.
Right off the bat, yes.
Yeah, got it. Okay, I'm starting to, this is kind of starting to gel. Okay.
It's a lot of information.
And I promise, I promise it's not much longer. So I see that the Kylie project is going to be in that gray zone. So that probably means that they're going to be exempt. So does that mean that the city cannot require Kylie to do any TDM?
So Kylie has an underlying orange, I should say dark orange, and
Okay.
it has an underlying orange. However, it is next to transit, so it would be within the gray buffer area for being exempt. We would look at whether or not it truly is exempt based on things like the density they're proposing, the parking numbers that they're proposing, and is the orientation, transit supported. It is, been proposed to be a mixed use project, so that's pretty good from a land use standpoint. So there's a lot that that project would probably meet to possibly be exempt. Given that it is a very large project, we will probably require some more substantial analysis than just saying it is exempt, because it's proposed as one of the larger projects in the city. So that's something that the city could have discretion on, but the exemption criteria could play. Like, for instance, if a parcel in that general area that was much smaller in size but was right next to transit, was transit supportive, had a good high density, that's something that could be exempt. But this particular project is very large in acreage, and so is probably worth an additional look to do that VMT analysis, but would be in that exempt area. But that's something the city would probably utilize its discretion to do additional analysis on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So I'm trying.
If I could just add in very briefly, anytime you use a categorical exemption under CEQA, the city still has the discretion to nevertheless require a more thorough environmental analysis, particularly where there are unusual conditions. And as Ms. Brio just identified, Kylie is massive. So no question, we're going to require the full analysis for Kylie, and we'll also require the LOS analysis.
Oh, okay. So exempt doesn't mean it doesn't mean a blank check for the developer.
It's not absolute, no.
Got it. Okay. Last question. So if we were to if you were to follow the schedule that's at the end of this presentation, what is the cutoff for the new project? How does the developer determine whether their project is under the old rules or the new rules?
So when we begin, oh yes.
Go ahead, Xander.
Well, if it's circulated after July 1st, we will be utilizing the new guidelines.
Okay, so does that mean like the developer gets an we had this discussion when Brandon was on the commission, but like is it like the filing or the
no, it's the circulation date. If we circulate the document after July 1st, it will be subject to the new standards.
So if the project is not entitled, then you're automatically under the new rule.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not aware of a document that we've already circulated that's not entitled off the top of my head.
I'm sorry. What I meant was, if the developer does not have an entitlement to build something by the time it's circulated, then you are automatically moving. Let's say that you're in the middle of like applying for a project, and that it's going to be problematic for the developer if the rule suddenly changes. So what's the activity that I don't
they're
know.
Not grandfathered. Yeah, if the application is in, they're not grandfathered. I mean, there are some rules where we look at the date of the notice of preparation, but this is not that situation. This is something where you're going to have virtually all projects are going to be subject to this very soon. Okay,
so the developer should know that this is coming and prepare for it.
They all know, absolutely. We've got a few things coming out before July 1st, but pretty soon everything will be under this.
Understood. Thank you very much. I yield.
Thank you, Commissioner Ikezi. All right, next up is Commissioner Chair Carew.
Thank you, Chair. So that was one of my questions, and then two comments. What happens with grandfathered projects when they are coming for extensions, re-entitlements, or changes to their project scopes?
Well, the rule for extensions, if the project is not going to be changed in size, for instance, if it's a development agreement that needs to get extended by another couple of years and it was analyzed under the old standards, in that case, you would continue to use the old standards. If there is a change to the project, such as an increase in size, then the new portion will be subject to the new standards. The old portion will continue to retain its entitlement under the old standards.
Got it. And then two comments. How is our TDM policy? So this is a VMT policy that we're going to institute now, correct?
Yes, we're asking. Yes, that's correct. I Ms. Mack answered, but yes.
Okay, and then we have a TDM policy?
We only have the climate action plan provisions. We do not currently have a separate TDM policy or a TDM ordinance. And so as you know, CAP is being updated this year.
So we have a climate action plan that recommends TDM measures and percentages.
Requires them for certain areas of the city, yes.
So when a project comes in addition to the VMT policy, however we choose to craft it, we'll also need to abide by the recommendations under the climate action plan for TDM.
Yeah, it will have to comply with whatever is the most restrictive.
Got it. Okay. So in that we have a prescriptive percentage of,
yes.
And that is?
It depends on the area. There's 4 different areas of the city. I could look up the chart while you ask another question.
Okay, all right. No, thank you so much. And then two, the last was a comment. We have to balance out the VMT and its requirements or exemptions along with parking. So when we are talking TDM and effectiveness of the VMT goals, we have to reduce parking. I mean, San Francisco is a classic example, and I personally have encountered it. You are absolutely deterred from driving into San Francisco. If you're working, your still option from your company is just based on Caltrans, BART, Bullet. They are making it cost prohibitive to park. So when we are evaluating projects, it makes absolute sense to look at significant parking reductions, thereby encouraging VMT's goals. So I wanted to just make that as comments to say the high cost of parking is a natural incentive to taking public transit and would serve as an effective TDM. So when we are talking about projects, I think it's a key aspect of how we reduce parking counts and thereby increase the goals of VMT.
I now have the answer to your earlier question. If you want me to just rattle it off, there are four transportation districts set forth in the Climate Action Plan. There's Stevens Creek Boulevard, El Camino Real, downtown, and north of Caltrain. The range is between 5% and 25% of the top end. Stevens Creek Boulevard, there's a 5% VMT reduction for regional commercial properties, 15% for community mixed use. For the El Camino Real corridor, there's currently a 15% VMT reduction for high density residential, 20% for community mixed use, 20% mixed use. And in all of these cases, the TDM measures, the TDM requirement's about 10% less than the VMT reduction. For downtown, we have a 20% VMT reduction. And for north of Caltrain, it varies between 15 and 25%, depending on the use. Note that the Climate Action Plan imposes these. These are obligatory. However, there are no penalties under our current TDM policy.
Got it. Thank you, Abe. That was really helpful. like we were talking, if we are actually going towards a VMT model, then I suggest we're also going to revisit our climate action plan or slash TDM policy, thereby encouraging even higher based on either the heat maps or based on the zones that we already have to somewhere closer to 35% in areas that are possible. I completely know and understand that it's not possible in all areas. And I think working with VTA on the zones that are in the city red right now, primarily because there are no VTA options there or other transit uh, potential. So I think those are my thoughts and suggestions when we are recommending the framework for how to write the policy on. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Commissioner Tirakuru. Next up is Commissioner Jane.
I think Commissioner Salam had his hand up first.
Okay, let's go to Vice Chair Salam.
Okay. I'll save you some grief. I only have one question. As the projects are reviewed and approved, how does VTA and other transit providers work with the city to adjust the transportation network to fit the updated needs? And so related to that, how are the impacts of reduced transit availability mitigated, like when bus routes are eliminated? Some of these projects got approved with certain expectations of buses and trains and other things. But when something like that gets reduced, is there a path back to try and find other ways to mitigate?
I think that's a great question. I don't think that anyone anticipated that transit would take quite the hit. I know it's been, really having its challenges. And again, with the current conditions, not only transit, but also people are starting to question the wisdom of denser housing. So these are going to be challenges moving forward. But what I can tell you is that the VTA does run a travel demand model for the county. It's fed by the MTC. And I think that instead of letting our models get 10 years old, we may have to be in a situation where we update our models much more frequently. It's costly, time-consuming, and the data collection is tremendous. However, if we really want to be successful at this, I think it's important that we have good data. The VTA did update their model this past year in order to produce all of this information for the cities to adopt their policies. So, we were in a good starting spot.
This is Rena. I just wanted to add on as well. It would be really great for us to get feedback from the VTA on timing of updates because there's some major transportation improvements that are coming online. We're all awaiting the Berryessa BART station opening, but that's going to make a big impact. Electrification of Caltrain is going to make a big impact. And much further down the road, but still very important to Santa Clara, is the BART station actually near downtown Santa Clara occurring. So all of those markers and milestones will hopefully increase the absorption of transit in our area, and I'm sure will be very important for us just from a metric standpoint.
And just on Monday, we had a discussion with the VTA and all the member agencies about what will happen when BART to Berryessa Station and BART to Milpitas is operational. And they really said we have to wait till the transit numbers are stable and we have a little bit of recovery. So they estimated that when the stations open up, that they would wait at least a year, possibly two, before they start data collecting. And that's reasonable considering the conditions that exist today.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Salam. Next up, Commissioner Jane.
After this COVID crisis is over, I think a lot of people will stay with driving. Now, I know that traffic may go down because people might adopt a work at home policy, but I imagine that traffic could possibly get even worse than it's been because people will be shy of riding public transit. I hope that's not true, but my so traffic mitigation, of course, is a very deep concern of mine, and I know that when the consultant talked to us, she said that Sunnyvale has a hybrid. Um, they have two numbers for VMT reductions. One is the daily VMT reduction, and then one is the peak hour trip reduction. So, does it make sense for us to adopt, say, a higher number for peak hour, because that's where we really want to cut down the congestion? And then my understanding from what she said was that TDM penalties are actually put into the zoning code, and in Sunnyvale for Moffett Park, it was put into their specific area plan. So if we were to think about TDM penalties, they would have to go into specific area plans or zoning codes. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I really like the comment about the two metrics, the VMT daily and the peak hour trip reduction. So I believe that those standards are in their TDM ordinance, and I'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. I have a few comments. Basically, all of my commissioners basically asked everything I really wanted to ask, so that's why I have no major questions. But Commissioner Biaggi said it just a little earlier about it's a lot to digest, and I agree, and it's a lot to learn, and I think a lot of us are learning from this, mainly hence being a study session. But the thing I've been thinking about the most is, with jobs and working from home, and maybe that this is going to start changing a lot of our models for the future, mainly because I feel this way. I'm working from home. I think it's a happier quality of life. I get to do more things at home. I don't have to sit in traffic to commute to work. I don't have to deal with that every morning at this, or as well as the afternoon. But it comes down to things like my office is 6 stories. We have all of us are working in areas. They live in areas that are all the way to the valley, like Modesto, as far south as Salinas, or as far north as Santa Rosa. And if we can reduce that by getting people like that to work from home for a company that is based over here in, let's say, Santa Clara, that would be essential. That would be perfect for everybody, because you're going to reduce childcare costs. You're going to have more people at home for their children. I mean, we're looking at areas that have parking costs that are $30 a day at least, and I think this could be an immense, impact. And my concerns also with the rail lines is I feel that we should start really increasing our rail lines and increasing what we can before that flood of people gets back to there, because I am in agreement with Commissioner Jane, and I'm a little worried about it, because I think a lot of people are going to stick with cars right now, because there's going to be a stigma about taking public transit. From what I've already heard is that they're limiting how many people can actually get on the bus right now, and that kind of concerns me as well, because this could be, I mean, we've been hearing that this could last all the way, social distancing can last all the way until 2022. So that kind of is a major concern to me, especially with economic issues. But I think that with all of that housing, I mean, with all that office space that we can lose, like for an example, my office building is 6 stories. We can reduce that real estate of offices and make that for either, places for people to shop, or at the same time, housing. And, we can accommodate that housing need that we're so lacking at the same time. But with economic conditions, what's happening now, I'm kind of concerned by that. Moving forward, I think I would be a fan of a TDM ordinance within our own city, and based on original data, but it's a scale that can be adjusted based on that data and what we can. I mean, I don't think 35% is a problem, and I think that's something that we should really look into as a city, of creating an ordinance. But basically, I just really commend the staff for putting this presentation together and really educating us on this. And the presentation was, I think, really great and very detailed. And it's really giving me more, seeing the maps and seeing how we can grow and what we might be short on. The thing I think we're really short on is roads. And I think we should have taken an opportunity soon to, fix our roads, one, and expand our roads. Because like Commissioner Jay and I were saying, a lot more people are going to be on the roads. And so I think we should focus on that at the same time as focusing on expanding those transit-oriented areas, but actually having the transit there. Because when we recently spoke, I think it was about the future plans of near the soccer fields in one of these presentations we had. There was no plans for that VTA or that area near that soccer field, or even I think it was forgive me, it's the east side one, ACE, I think it is. No, there was no plans to do that, in the future. So it's like that's something that I think we should all be on the same page on, and really kind of get VTA on board, because we should all plan cohesively rather than piece and meal here. And I know that's what you guys are aiming for. It's just at the same time I'm really concerned about that for the future, that we may not plan enough, but then maybe plan too much. We're already waiting for Berryessa Station to be open, and I remember that was talked about being open as of now, and that's another major concern that's going to also lead to less people being on transit. But moving forward, are there anybody else that has any other questions before we move forward in the meeting? Anybody for any staff comments? Seeing none.
Did any email come in?
Any email come in?
No, there are no comments on the e-comment.
Okay, awesome. All right, so then I guess we can move forward with the meeting then. We don't have to do any closing. Do we have to close any public hearings or any?
No, that's not necessary.
Okay, so let's move forward to reports of commission, board, and liaison and committee. Let's go with number 1, announcements and other items. Anybody have any announcements or any other items? Please raise your hand. Okay. Seeing none, I just wanted to give a thanks and a shout out to Nancy Biagini and Commissioner Ikezi for going out there and making masks and reaching out for all of us to get us those masks. At the same time, I really want to give reach out and say thank you to the Santa Clara Community Coalition. You have done an awesome job, especially Harbir Bhatia. You have really provided something for the community, and this has been nothing but helping hands. You're heroes without capes, honestly. And I just want to thank the rest of my commission. You guys have been here for us, and we all check in with each other, and we're always there for each other. And lastly, I want to say a happy belated birthday to Vice Chair Salame.
Oh, and I thought I could get by without anybody noticing it. Okay, thank you.
Happy birthday.
Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday.
Happy
And I
birthday.
want
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Don't worry, I won't sing.
and
Okay.
I want to thank the staff again for coming in the midst of this. It must be scary to be there. So thank you.
Thank you, staff.
You're welcome.
Are we going to move on? Chair Becker, are you there?
Oh, sorry about that. I thought I wasn't muted. My apologies.
No worries.
Let's move on to development review hearing.
Yeah, so we did have our first development review hearing under these circumstances. One item only was deemed essential to be heard, and that was a data center project. All of the planning commissioners were emailed the information about the hearing before the hearing happened. It happened on the 15th of this month, and the item was approved, and that's it on my report. As I mentioned, all items that are going to any sort of hearing are are only being brought forward if they're deemed essential and are reviewed and approved by the city manager. So we only had one item for that hearing.
Okay, thank you. All right. One last thing with from before I forgot to mention. Thank you to Suds Jane, also Commissioner Jane, for doing the story time on that Santa Clara Community Coalition. Really appreciate it. All right. Next, we're moving to item number 3, Commissioner Travel and Training Reports and request to attend trainings. Any commissioners have any comments and concerns or anything from staff?
So this is Rena. I wanted to add that I've proceeded based on the action that the commission took last meeting to allow me to schedule some trainings. We have a training tentatively scheduled with the Urban Land Institute on June 15th. They will be drilling down on the cost of development. And I think this is going to be a very meaty, really helpful presentation by 2 to 3 practitioners in real estate finance and economics. So I think it's going to be really phenomenal. There's a lot of kind of back of house things that I'm dealing with to bring that training forward. But the date that the trainers have established is June 15th. That is not an actual scheduled commission meeting. This is something I'm going to touch on in a little bit, but because of the shelter-in-place situation, we have been holding back on bringing items forward to the Planning Commission. And so if in May, on May 27th, we are able to have more items come forward, that will be a fairly packed agenda, and our June scheduled meeting will likely be very packed as well. So I'm suggesting the training on June 15th in order to facilitate really keeping those May and June agendas pretty free and clear for the regular business that will likely have to occur. So we can send an email to everyone to make sure that that date works for them. Is there any planning commissioner that knows offhand that June 15th is not a good one for them? It would be an evening meeting and, held remotely or held in person, depending on circumstances.
Works for me.
I see Commissioner Biagini had her hand up for a second, or?
Actually, I was just waiting for to give the training report. So.
Oh, okay. No problem.
I'm good with this. I'm good with June 15th.
Anything else, Rena?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm still talking to Watchery Design. My own personal capacity is somewhat limited in how much time I can kind of attend to this particular activity because there's some steps involved with getting contracts and insurance and a lot of formalities on the back end. So I haven't done that yet with the Watchery Design team to see if they can do a training for us on sort of the future of parking structures, structured parking, I should say. But that's something I'm hoping that we would be able to execute this fiscal year. But I just wanted to acknowledge, because Commissioner Jane was interested in something related to form-based zoning codes, and that may be difficult for me to arrange before the end of the fiscal year and timing and whatnot. So.
Okay, thank you, Rena.
I actually talked to Opticos Design, and they have a sort of canned presentation that they would be very happy to present to us.
If you want to do an email introduction to them, I'll do what I can with our admin staff as well. But I just wanted to share with you our limited capacity and kind of moving a lot of that forward.
Sure.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Jane.
I don't know if everybody's going to be available, but I'm open to chat.
Thank you. Let's see, Commissioner Biagini.
Yes, this is the report that I would give this time instead of last time on the League of Cities Planning Commissioners Academy that I attended from March 4th to 6th up in Sacramento, right before everything shut down. I will say that I cannot say enough good about the Planning Commissioners Academy. It was beyond excellent for me. I'm going to say right now, I will look forward to going again next year. It's going to be in Garden Grove, hopefully. It'll happen. It was not just attended by newer planning commissioners. There was also significant numbers of city staff there. And I would say it's not just a beginning session. There was also a lot of, I would term it, updated information provided over previous sessions, which is why I found it so valuable. I'm going to run through kind of quickly what they covered so you get the idea of the extent of the academy. Pre-conference trainings included understanding public service ethics, laws, and principles, and that was primarily dealing with AB 1234. I did go to that. There was some comedic respite. The opening general session actually had an interesting commentary by a woman who told us all how improv comedy can help revitalizing planning, engaging residents, and save your community. I thought it was very valuable because who would have thought? Classes that were taught, I wish I could have gone to all of them, but like most conferences, you have 2 or 3 choices that you have to make for every given segment. I did attend Planning Commission 101, nuts and bolts of planning. They also had how to conduct effective and respectful Planning Commission meetings, but I think we're good there. I didn't go to that class. I went to CEQA from the beginning. There was a class on development agreements, the Planning Commission's role in reviewing them. Other ones included CEQA, really getting down into the weeds, the grassroots as opposed to just the grass tops. I did attend that. There were classes on, or sessions on the relationship between Planning Commission, City Council, and planning staff. Kind of went in and out of that one because I was trying to cover 2 at once. That was quite good. You Are What You Tweet, an official survival guide, was an interesting one. What happens before Planning Commission review, another class that I attended. There was a class I didn't go to on meeting management tips for efficient and effective public meetings. I did go to one that was quite a lot to digest, how to prepare findings and conditions of approvals. I took a lot of notes, so I'm happy to share with anyone who wants to see. They had some speed sessions in the trenches with your general plan, ins and outs of shared mobility, accessory dwelling units and regulation challenges, a whole session on just burning questions that you might have. And then one that I did go to on what planners need to know about city finances today. I will say another kind of comedic relief was a guy who gave us the closing session. We had a legislative update, but Andrew's so good at that. We also had the closing general session from a guy who entitled it, "The Truth About Judging, Understanding Why They Always Seem to Misunderstand." And it was quite entertaining and actually informative. So that's my quickie report. Hope it was quick, but I will say that it was so packed, so informative, and I think so important that I have my hand raised for next year's session over in, if as long as they keep it, what did I say it was? Garden Grove, I think, down in Southern California. So there you have it. I do have a book from the League of Cities. It's a little magazine. I have a copy for all of my fellow commissioners. But before I was able to bring it down to City Hall, well, y'all know what happened. But I'll keep it and disinfect it when we all meet again. Thanks. I yield.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Biagini. That was a very detailed report and glad to hear. Let's go on to Commissioner Chair Kuru.
Thank you, Commissioner Biagini. That was really helpful, and you probably got a few of us motivated for next year. I just wanted to share that I was forwarded an interesting article by Cushman and Wakefield on recovery readiness, a how-to guide for reopening your workplace. It has some really interesting tips, but it's a good article and a good read of how the future is also going to be in office and work environments. So I thought it was a good read. If anybody's interested, please send it out. I yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair Kuru. All right. Any other commissioners have any commissioner travel or training reports? I just wanted to say thank you to our presenter tonight for this training, and it was very insightful. All right. We're moving on to Director of Community Development and Reports. Planning Commission budget updates.
I don't have a budget update for you tonight. We don't have that prepared. I will say that the ULA presentation study session is costed at about $3,000. And so the commission had given me authorization for $5,000. So I just want to give you a running tab on the expense of that $5,000 thus far.
Thank you, Rena. Okay, let's move on to, let's see here, upcoming agenda items.
Yes, so depending on the shelter-in-place situation and obviously also authorization by the city manager, we'll probably have a pretty packed May 27th meeting. There is also the related Santa Clara Development Area Plan number 2 that is timing to also occur in that general time frame. So we may be asking for a special meeting on that project to free up capacity, especially if we want to make sure that we don't have a lot of attendance at meetings, just related to being able to provide an environment for the public and for staff in these hearing situations. I do want to say that the City Council will be testing out using public participation remotely at this upcoming City Council meeting on the 28th, so we're hoping that we'll be able to utilize that for the May 27th Planning Commission or a Planning Commission after, in the May timeframe in general. So more information and probably a request out to you all on a special meeting in May as well.
Right, thank you, Rena. And yes, I'm for any special meetings that need to be called. I'll be there for it to help keep the ball rolling and keep things moving in our city. Let's move on to City Council actions.
I don't have any that is pertinent to the Planning Commission since we last met.
Okay, thank you, Rena. Well, thank you to our staff. Thank you to the camera crews. Thank you to Elizabeth Elliott, Rena, Gloria. Thank you all. Thank you to my fellow commissioners for being here for everyone and each other and getting through all of this. And thank you to our City Council. So we are all in this together. Stay strong. Stay Santa Clara strong, and God bless you all. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Chair.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank
Terrific.
you.
Stay
Good night.
safe. Holler if you need a face mask.